Well, hello everyone. In case you might have guessed, my name is Devon, so that's good. Otherwise, you'd be like, why is he even up here? And I do want to start with an apology. I did have a PowerPoint prepared for you, but I brought my trusty USB key, and it's no longer trusty. So it didn't work, so you just have to listen to my voice and follow along as best as you can with that. But I wanted to share a little bit about who I am. So like I said, my name is Devon, and I'm a pastor at a church in Calgary, Alberta, and I'm one of 3 potential people to be the pastor here. I've been in ministry for 11 years. I've been married to my wife, Kendra, who's here today, for 5 years. It'll be 6 this December, and we don't have kids yet, but we do have 4 pets, 1 dog, 2 cats, and a bunny. And on the most part, they get along. Well, most of them. The cats and the bunny, it's a little scary, but we just keep them apart and then they're happy. But a little bit more about me and who I am, just to share a brief little bit so you guys can get to know me, but then also like afterwards, I'm open to questions and whatever afterwards. You can ask me all the questions. I'm a pretty open book. But I grew up in a non-Christian home. So my mom and dad, they had like some church background in how they grew up, but not much for like when they got married and had me. So I didn't really know much about who God was, and I didn't until I got to grade 3. And we ended up getting new neighbors that lived beside us, and they were Christian. They had kids that were my age and my brother's age, and we spent a lot of time together. We hung out a lot, and then they started to like invite us over for like family dinner time and family movie nights, and they just kept loving on us and loving on us. And it led to my parents being like, what's so different about you guys? Like, why are you different than everyone else we've talked to? And they shared that's because of Jesus, from the love that they've received from him. And that started further conversations for my parents, which then led to us going to church with them. And then my parents became Christians, and then shortly afterwards, I prayed the same prayer that Jesus would be my forever friend as a kid, and got baptized shortly afterwards. And I was starting a journey with God from that point. And I'd love to say that from there, everything was just like daisies and awesome, but it wasn't. Shortly afterwards, my grandmother died in a motorcycle accident, tragically, and my dad was a transport truck driver, so my grandfather was driving the motorcycle. He survived, but was put in critical care, so we had to take care of him. And in that, my dad parked his truck, didn't work, bills piled up, and we ended up going bankrupt and moving away. And when we moved, we didn't end up attending another church. So for years and years, I had this knowledge, this idea of who Jesus was, but there was no one pouring into me, no one discipling me, and my faith just kind of flatlined for a good while of my life. And then in grade 11, my dad got diagnosed with skin cancer in his left shoulder from hanging it out of a transport truck. Now, don't worry, it's not all sad things. He got this cancer, and it was serious, but they wanted to see where it was, so they booked him in for exploratory surgery just to kind of see. And my dad had to wait because, you know, our healthcare system's wonderful. And while he was waiting for that, he met another trucker on the road in the States, and they were just talking about life, waiting to unload at a factory. And my dad ended up sharing with him about his cancer. This guy gets called up by the person running the factory, says, "You're next, go to this dock, unload." And he goes, "Well, good luck with everything," turns and heads towards his truck, stops, and then comes back to my dad and said, "God's telling me I need to pray for you. Can I pray for you?" So he prays over my dad. Afterwards, he says, "All my life, God's been telling me to do things, but today I listened." Then he got in his truck, did his thing. My dad never saw or heard from that man again, but when he went in for surgery, he no longer had cancer. So, which is really cool. God healed through the faithfulness of someone else, and that's the beauty of that testimony. And so that kick-started my parents' like joy and love with Jesus even more. And so they started being like, all right, we're going to go to church now. We're going to take part in things. We're going to dig in 100%. And I was a very stubborn grade 11 boy that loved to stay up late and sleep in. So going to church was very hard for me. But I'd go and I would hear the word of God, and I would interact with the worship songs, and it was just slowly tearing down the walls that I had built up over the years. And then when I got to grade 12, I was right around the time where I was supposed to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I was like, you know what? I grew up in a farming town, but I don't know how to farm. So I'm going to do the next best thing. I'm going to go into the trades and fix the farming equipment. So I had that all planned out. I had it all sorted. I'd even started my apprenticeship. And throughout the months of grade 12, God just kept taking that desire away more and more and more. And it grew to the point where I was sitting in these classes learning about like machining and welding and, the fun things. And I was like, I hate this. This is awful. But God was preparing something different in me in that time, because my dad also then invited me to go to a weekend conference with him. So I went. And at that conference, they shared the gospel the first night. And this was in Toronto. I'm from Ontario. Hopefully you can forgive me and still like me after that. But we went to this conference, and they shared the gospel. They shared the story of the prodigal son. And it was an actor that did one-person monologues through the son, the older brother, and the father. And then afterwards, they invited those to come and receive Jesus. And in that, I had already received Jesus, but I was like, I need now to take that step and just recommit and say I'm all in. And I felt this pulling in my life. So I said, all right, God, I'm here. I don't know what that means, but I'm just going to fully surrender to you. So at 18, right when you're supposed to be applying for colleges, I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. I have this love for Jesus, and I feel like I'm supposed to use it for something, but I don't know what. And that's where I started learning about missionaries and Bible school and like being a pastor and all of those different aspects of it. And I was like, maybe. And I was like, I don't know if I could be a pastor. That's kind of scary. So I'll start with swinging at being a missionary. So I went to Bible school. In my first year, we did a 1-year certificate that brought us to, you learned about like missions work, some basic theology stuff, kind of just like prepping you for the field. And then you serve for 6 weeks in another country over the summer. So I was set up to go to Cambodia, and we were there for 5.5 weeks, so a little short of the 6, but that's what they had time for me to head on over. And I went on that trip, and I learned a lot about myself. I learned I'm not good in random countries where I don't know the language. But I also learned that the things that brought me joy and excitement was getting to share about who God was with people. And when we did like our English camps and spent time with kids and with students, it was like, this feels right. So I went back to school, graduated, and jumped into ministry very blindly, but also very trusting in God in the process. And through that, I actually managed to win an award out of everyone that graduated as the person that will most likely succeed as a pastor. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means, but I'm still here 11 years in, so clearly that meant something. But I'm just very grateful, and I trust in God with each step that he's taken me, with each church that he's brought me to, with every conversation that I've been able to have. It's always, I don't know fully what to say or what to do, but I know, God, you're with me, you're good, and you're able to do that. And even in this process here, I'm here, and I'm just trusting God. But like I said, I'm happy to answer more questions afterwards. I just want to share a little bit about who I am so you guys can know, and that way you're not just like this awkward dude in a floral shirt that's just going to tell me about Jesus. You know a little bit about me now. So for today's message, I titled it The Blessed Life. And when you hear the term, I am blessed, what is like the typical reason that you hear for it? For me, typically, it's often because someone received something that they don't deserve. And that can be for like big things or small things, like some of the small things, like you're driving to work and you hit every green light and you're running late, so you're like, oh, that's great. Or if you are like me and you enjoy a hamburger or a bunch of chicken nuggets a little too much, you go to McDonald's and you order a 10-pack meal and you open up the box and there's that blessed 11th nugget just sitting in there. And you're like, oh, I am blessed. Thank you, Jesus. This is the best thing ever. But then on the more serious note, there are going to be times where God also brings like huge moments in your life in as well. Not that nuggets aren't serious because you need food. But there was a time in my life when I finished my first year of ministry and I was called to go serve in Kenya for 10 days on a missions trip. And so I signed up having no money for the trip, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to trust God, you will provide. And we had times throughout the year leading up to the trip where we had to have certain installments of money raised, or like physically paid out of your own pocket. And I didn't have the money to pay for it in my pocket. I was new in ministry. So I was like, all right, God, I'm trusting in you. So the first one came up, and it was the biggest one. It was $1,000, and it was for the tickets to be able to fly there and fly back, which was a great cost for a ticket to go to Kenya and back for $1,000. Well, actually under. But I was like, I don't have $1,000. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I said, God, if you want me to go, I need you to provide. So I was spending time praying over this very moment and being like, okay, God, I need you to provide. My phone rings. And when I was in school, I was a part of a brand new started church plant that was by my school. I played on the worship team there, and then I also got to do some of my first sermons at that church as well, and that lead pastor helped pour into me as a communicator. And so he calls me, and his name's Jay, and I'm like, hey, Jay, how's it going? He's like, great, Devon, tell me about you. Like, how's life? What's going on? So I just kind of share a little bit about what's like update in ministry and all that stuff. And he's like, our elder board's finally at the point now where we're making enough in tithing that we want to actually support someone. And everyone unanimously said that they wanted to send a gift to you. And that gift was exactly $1,000, which is exactly what I needed for the missions trip, even though no one knew. And for the rest of the money for the trip, God provided in that way through generous people as well. And I don't think that definition of blessed is wrong. I don't think that definition of blessed is something that you're going to look at and be like, I don't know, because you are blessed in those moments. But I think there's a fuller meaning to blessed that comes out of it. And that's what we're going to be looking at in our time together today out of Psalm chapter 1. But before we dive in, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of information for Psalms. So as some of you may know, the Psalms are a collection of prayers written by different authors. A large portion of them are written by King David. And these Psalms cover different times in history of the Bible and can typically be read independent because of that. It's not like it's following like a timeline or an order. They're just all there put together, and they're covering different points in history. And Psalm 1 itself is actually unique because when it was first brought to the book of Psalms, it was not numbered. It was the unnumbered psalm. And it was seen as an instructional for the person that's about to come into and read the Psalms. And then later on, they added Psalm 1 to it. And it became the first psalm in the book of Psalms as we have it today. But this psalm lays the groundwork for how we should approach the Psalms and the law of God. And this is a psalm of wisdom. So it's described by scholars as one that we're supposed to look at, learn from, and then apply to our lives. And it's also one that emphasizes the law, which is the Old Testament law that they would have had as their text back then. So with that, let's read Psalm 1. It says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction." A couple small structural things as we hop on into this section or in this psalm together. This psalm shows a comparison between two different lifestyles or life choices, the way of the righteous and then the way of the wicked. And these are both paths and lifestyles that people still actively choose and walk in today. And I know you might be thinking that word wicked seems a little harsh. It has a better and different meaning in the original language, which we'll get to later on. But people actively choose between these each and every single day. And out of this understanding, our psalm then is broken into three sections. Verses 1 to 2, which is guilt by association. Verses 3 to 4, which is identifying the fruit. And then verses 5 and 6, which is the ultimate consequences. So we'll look at these three sections together. So first, let's reread verses 1 and 2. It says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night." So the term blessed here is actually talking about experiencing happiness from a sense of well-being or a sense of right blessedness. Similar to the word blessed that's actually used in the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount. It's the same meaning, although that's a Greek word and this was a Hebrew word, so they were different words, but had the same meaning and the same intention. And in the first verse, there are also these two progressions that are shared. There's walk, stand, sit, and then wicked, sinners, and mockers. And these progressions work together, but they're also significant in and of themselves. So first, for walk, stand, and sit, what it's not saying is it's not saying that all we do now is lie down or we'd all be a little off here this morning. And it's not saying that we're not supposed to spend time around those who don't know who God is, because that would go against the Great Commission out of Matthew. What it's actually talking about is the progression of a personal choice that one makes, more than about physically walking, standing, and sitting. So when one chooses to walk in the lifestyle of righteousness, when they choose to go down that path, think of it like this. It's like you're trying to go from point A to point B, but there's a bunch of people walking in a different direction in between. And as you go in, you have to go through this crowd to get to the point that you're trying to go to, the path of righteousness. So as you enter into that group of people that are all walking this way, you feel the pushing, you feel the momentum, you feel the tension. And oftentimes in life, people will just naturally be like, okay, well, I'll get out on the other side a little farther down and walk out. So you kind of stumble along as you're going through. Or you might meet someone in that path and you're like, oh, this guy, his name's Timmy, we have the same interests, so we're just going to hang out for a bit. And all of a sudden that group stops and you're standing there with them. Then they sit down and you sit down with them. It's this idea of if you're not determined and locked in on what you're pushing for and what you're striving for, then you might end up getting swayed into something else. Hence the guilt by association type title. And if that doesn't work for you as an imagery, think of it like this. You're going shopping with a group of friends, and you guys decide we're going to get coffee. But you specifically, you love McDonald's coffee. And everyone else in the group loves Tim Hortons. Now in that time, you guys gather together, you get into the vehicle, and you're like, well, we're going to go, but we're going to hit Tim's first because the majority of the people want Tim's, and we'll go to McDonald's afterwards. Well, at that Tim Hortons, unless you absolutely hate McDonald's, 9 times out of 10, you're going to end up with a Tim Hortons coffee, and then you're going to go shopping with your friends. And it's because when you're associated with it, it's just easier to be like, I'll just do this instead of being an inconvenience. And it's the same with our lifestyle choices. If we aren't determined, we will drift. If we aren't determined, we'll end up in places we thought we never could have been. And the psalmist, in their wisdom, knew that and wanted the reader to understand that a lifestyle of righteousness, they have to hold to it. And they cannot slip into the way of wickedness. They have to be steadfast and locked in on the path of righteousness. Which then leads to our second progression, which is wickedness, or wicked, sinners, and mockers. Now, like I said, you may be sitting here and thinking the word wicked, that seems a little harsh, it seems a little strong. And that's because in the English translation, it seems rough. But in the original meaning for this word, it was actually a word that was declared guilty or could be seen as guilty in a court of law. So in this case, what the psalmist is getting at is he's saying that God is the judge of every person that is living, and he's looking at the lives that they lived, and he's making a judgment call, which if they aren't living a lifestyle of righteousness, so they aren't seen as right, then they are then seen as guilty of sinning, which in the original language meant wicked. So wicked in this instance is more speaking to the consequences of one that has not been saved by Christ, which as we know can often come from a lack of understanding of who Jesus is or not having an interaction yet with God. And that's why the Great Commission is so significant and so important, that we are to live as Christ-like followers, because that's how people get to interact with who God is. So it can be without awareness, but there's still one that has not received salvation through Jesus. And then for sinners, it's the next step in the progression. This is someone who acted what is right. And then we get to the mocker. And this is someone that is so ingrained in a life of sin, they now openly choose to mock or ridicule and pass judgment on those who are living a different lifestyle than they are. So in this progression, it starts with like walking with sinners. So you're walking with people that might be leading you down a path that's away from God. And then it turns to standing among sinners. So you're standing with people that are actively choosing and saying, like, I am not following who Jesus is. And then it comes down to sitting amongst them at the table. And it's very easy to then slip into doing the very mocking that those mockers are doing towards those who are walking the path of righteousness. So then how does a person remain steadfast and connected on the path? Regularly, which was their scriptures that they had during that time. But they read it in a way that they wanted to learn from it. They read it in a way that they wanted to glean truth out of it, absorb it into who they were, so it helped change and shape and mold who they were as believers. They read it so they could apply it and then put it into action. And that way they were able to then live lives that were committed to righteousness because they knew what they had to do. They were equipped in how to do it, and they were able to stay focused and steadfast on it. So then how do we know that we're living by the law properly based on this psalm? Well, it's by identifying the fruit in their lives. And verse 3-4 talks about this, so we'll read it again. It says, that person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. Oh, I jumped too far ahead there. I do that sometimes because I love reading Bible. But yeah, so in this it talks about the righteous and how they're like a tree, and then it says the wicked that they're like a chaff. So it's giving us a living example out of this psalm. And what I like about the righteous person being compared to a tree is it's not just saying it's a tree that's planted in a backyard that gets water sometimes. It's the conditions that the tree is in that it talks about. It's a tree that's planted by a stream. So this stream is bringing a constant fresh source of water to the tree. They're soaking in the sun. The soil is fertile. It's able to dig deep roots and to live a long life. It's able to grow and bear fruit, which is beneficial. And what the psalmist is getting at is the person that is like